All right, everybody, welcome back to Onshape. We're going to be designing our very first fidget spinner. We're going to start with the variable that we already know, and that's going to be for the diameter of our bearings. So we're going to call it bearing diameter, and we're going to actually measure it in, we'll keep it in centimeters. It's going to be 2.2, and there we go. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to start off with a sketch to make something very simple, just to make sure that our bearing is going to fit properly. Once we 3D print, we might decide we want it to be slightly larger or slightly smaller so the bearing will actually fit into our drawing. I'm going to start with a sketch. I prefer the sketching from the top. You can choose any plane you wish to sketch on. We're just going to start here and then get our top view. I'm going to use a center point circle. Click on that center point, click here. I'm going to type any old number, and then I'm going to replace it though with our bearing diameter. Alright, and I'm going to call this bearing test, and that looks good actually. Hit enter there, and I'm going to make another circle that's outside of here, so we at least have some sort of dimensionality that that's going to hold the bearing in place while we test it. So I'm going to make it somewhat arbitrary size. We're going to play with that later. So that should be okay. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to just copy this a few times, paste it just over here. That looks good. I'm going to paste again, put that just over here. That looks good. And I'm going to make this one slightly smaller. So how much smaller? Let's try it 95% the size, so times 0.95. We're going to make that inner hole slightly smaller. Here we're going to make it slightly larger, so that's going to be times 1.05. And now we have a couple different hole sizes to test out. So what we're going to do, we're going to do an extrusion. So there's extrude, and we're going to check this outer circle, and this outer circle, but we don't need it to be that high. Our bearing is only approximately 7 millimeters tall, so we'll make this a nice even 7 millimeters. We might play around with that value later, but we'll probably at some point also want to make that a variable. So let's call it bearing height and 0.7 millimeters. We might find again that we're going to change that a little bit depending on how exactly our printer prints what we tell it to, how much it shrinks, and that is going to depend on the material. It might even depend on the color. Each one is a little bit different. So here we have our 3 parts. We can send all 3 of those parts off to the 3D printer, STL, and I'm going to call this Mr. Barnum bearing sizing test, and resolution fine, units, I think we actually going to want millimeters, and we'll hit download. Alright, so you can submit those through Google Classroom is going to be our best bet. And then while that's happening, we can continue on with the rest of the design. So let me just